kind of felt embarrassed that I was in a field of mental health that didn't define what the mental meant. My colleagues in philosophy of mind didn't have a definition of mind. In fact, they said you should never define it. And the reason was you'll limit your understanding. The mind can be defined in this way.
Dr. Dan Siegel is an award-winning professor at UCLA School of Medicine, co-founder of the Mindsight Institute, and a best-selling author whose work bridges neuroscience, mindfulness, and human connection. His groundbreaking research on the mind, relationship, and well-being has made him one of today's most influential voices in psychology and personal growth.
Every way that we have mental suffering can be reinterpreted as the chaos and rigidity of impaired integration. You have these domains of integration, there are 9 of them, and if you can figure out where there's a blockage, you liberate the system to release the natural movement to health.
After someone understands these 9 different domains, what's usually the next step to help them grow and heal?
So in therapy, my patients often go, how did that work? Was that magic? And I go, it's actually...
Welcome to Light Within. We are so excited you're here.
But before we dive in, we'd love to ask you for a quick favor. We're a brand new podcast, and your hitting subscribe would mean the world to us. So please take a moment to hit subscribe, like, comments, and help our team bring this amazing content to you every single week. Thank you. And now back to the episode.
Dan, welcome to Light Within. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Daniel. Great to be here with you and Steve.
Dan, usually we have a much easier time describing our guests because they've done one incredible thing. With you, it's been much harder. You've made such profound impact on psychology, psychiatry, even biology, and our understanding of our mind, our relationships. So first of all, we just wanted to thank you for all of your work and contributions to the world and really helping us gain this deep level of understanding of our mind.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words.
Absolutely. The first question we wanted to start off with is, what is the understanding of the mind that you came to after your research?
Yeah, what a great question to start with, a simple one. I was always interested in kind of how people became who they became. And as my own journey through life went forward, the feeling of being alive and the subjective sense of what had meaning for you and how you focused your attention, the emotions you had, the sensations of your body, all that stuff seemed really, really important. So for me as an adolescent, when I was in college, this notion that there is a real inner life that matters became very important. In my own family, sadly, really neither of my parents focused on this inner nature of who we were, my brother and I. And so it was a really, in a way, mind-blind family. Your feelings, your thoughts, what mattered to you, your own journey through life, the purpose of things for you as an individual was not really considered. So in college, when I was on the suicide prevention service, it was kind of a shocker that not only was the mind real, but it became literally a matter of life and death, whether you focused on it or not. So when I went on to medical school, the absence of a focusing on the inner nature of our mental lives, which could be summarized with the absence of empathy and compassion in my professors, led me to drop out. And I went on a journey to try to see what I was going to do with my life. I thought about being a salmon fisherman. I thought about being a dancer. And then when I didn't have the body for a dancer, I thought I'd be a choreographer. So then I thought I'd starve to death as a choreographer. So I decided to go back to medical school. It was around the time, sadly, John Lennon was assassinated by a human being who thought he was the real John Lennon and had to go to New York to find the fake, which was obviously the real John Lennon, and kill him. So that subjective experience of that assassin's mind led to the death of John Lennon. And this kind of shocked me into this thing like, wow, my professors in medical school must be really wrong to conduct their professional lives without a focus on the mind. So I went back and thought about, for the first time ever, being a psychiatrist. And when I ultimately started in pediatrics, but then switched to psychiatry, it was a fascinating field, but it was a field that didn't define what the mind was, even though psyche means mind or intellect or soul or spirit in the Webster's dictionary. So I went on this journey to try to say, well, there was so much focus on the brain. Let's just start with a simple question like, what is the connection of mind, including our subjective experiences and our consciousness of those experiences and how we process information? What's the connection of those three common descriptions of what mind includes and the brain? And in doing that back in 1992, the beginning of the decade of the brain, I was kind of shocked to find that not only my field, psychiatry, didn't define the mind, but my colleagues in psychology did not have a definition of mind. My colleagues in philosophy of mind didn't have a definition of mind. In fact, they said you should never define it. And the reason was that if you define it, they said, you'll limit your understanding. So as I went out and became an educator in the field of mental health and also was a very active psychotherapist, I kind of felt embarrassed that I was in a field of mental health that didn't define what the mental meant. So I ended up in this group I ran, well, a group I initially invited people to come to, 40 scientists, saying, look, let's see the relationship of mind and brain. And everyone could say what the brain was. It was a complex organ up in your head, 100 billion neurons, and they all communicate to each other in fascinating ways that we don't really understand. And then we said, okay, well, what's the mind? And no one from anthropology to the biologists, including neuroscientists, had a definition, let alone a shared even set of descriptors. So the group was going to disband, and I had to come up with a definition just to have this group of 40 scientists work together. So I went for a long walk, this was in LA, and I grew up here, and I went for a walk on the beach, and I'm looking out at the waves going, what am I going to say to this group of 40 scientists that could get them to collaborate with each other instead of be so in conflict and so much tension? So I looked at the waves, and I just got this feeling like, what is a wave really? On the surface, it looks like it's a bunch of water coming toward you and it crashes on your feet. And you get the surface belief that it's a bunch of water molecules coming toward you. And that would be a totally understandable interpretation of what you're seeing. Just like people say, well, the mind is what the brain does. It just seemed like a surface view. So then when you really think about that wave in the ocean, when you go beneath the surface, you realize it's not water molecules moving toward you. The molecules that are going up and down, sure, 100 yards out, when they hit your feet, it's not the same water molecules. What's being transferred is energy. So the energy that you saw move molecules out there is the energy now that's at your feet, not the water molecules. So then I said, okay, well, I'd been trained as an attachment researcher, which means I studied parent-child relationships. And we were immersed in the relational connections, the communication patterns between a parent and a child and how that shapes the child's mind. So I was familiar with that. But then I thought, but what's that made of? And then when I saw the wave out in the ocean, I said, oh my God, what's happening between a parent and a child's energy flow and communication patterns? It's all energy. Some of it has symbolic value. We call energy in a formation that stands for something. And we simplify that as information. But it's energy in formation that is symbolizing something. So then I went, wow, if it's energy flow, what if the mind has something to do with energy flow? This idea of synergy, something's greater than the parts themselves. The whole is greater than the sum. And in the 1980s, the mathematicians and physicists who got together to study complex systems said there's something called emergence. So I said, well, it's kind of like the wetness of water. It's not in any single water molecule. It's in the interaction of the water molecules. So I said, what if the mind is an emergent property of energy, whether that's embodied energy flow or it's relational energy flow? Neither skull nor skin would be barriers for that flow. And that what we'd be really looking at when we look at the mind is an emergent aspect of energy. And maybe that explains consciousness. Maybe it explains subjective experience. Maybe it's information processing, of course, emerges from energy flow. But then a fourth facet of mind came up, which was a definition of mind that came from reading a math book, which was basically complex systems that organize themselves through something called self-organization. And I looked at the mathematics of self-organization, and it was unbelievable. It said that when a complex system like a cloud is unfolding over time, it's regulating its own becoming. And it does that by optimizing complexity, by maximizing complexity. And it achieves maximal complexity by balancing differentiation of the aspects of the cloud or any complex system on the one hand, and linking them on the other. And in the linkage, they don't lose differentiation. And I could just name that as the process of integration. And it looked like an integrated flow created harmony. But if you're out of that integrated flow, it went to either chaos on one bank of a river, or if you had the other bank, it would be rigidity. And then everything I'd been witnessing in my own patients, they were either with chaos or rigidity, started to become clear as an example of impaired self-organization or regulation. So the definition of the mind, this fourth facet, is this. The mind can be defined in this way: the embodied and relational, emergent, self-organizing process that is regulating the flow of energy and information within the whole body, including its brain, and within our relationships with people on the planet. And so that definition then also gave rise to a definition of mental health. A healthy mind is that mind which promotes integration within and between.
Wow. Dan, I think that was the most incredibly thoughtful definition of the mind that serves as a foundation for now how we understand what our mind is. And what you're describing is that it's not just the brain and its chemical reactions. That's a subset of that, but it is really how our mind receives and processes information relationally from others, from the world, that constitutes what it is. And when it misbehaves, like when there is chaos or rigidity in our minds, that's what causes problem. That's a lack of integration from your definition.
Exactly. And then the whole thing kind of fits together. And every way that we have mental suffering can be reinterpreted as the chaos and rigidity of impaired integration, where you're compromising self-regulation. And amazingly, whether it's in parenting or in being in a couple or your own personal journey, so far you have these domains of integration. There are 9 of them. And if you can figure out where there's a blockage to integration, which is either differentiation, linkage, or it's both, you liberate the system to release the natural movement to health, so that healing and health come from a wholeness that emerges with integration. And it's important to remember, it's not like a smoothie. It's not like a blending of everything is balanced and mushed up together. You need to maintain the differentiated aspects of the system as they become linked. So it's more like a fruit salad than a smoothie. And then when you see it that way and apply these 9 domains of integration, so far, and I've been doing this now for over 33 years, it works. So in therapy, my patients often go, "How did that work? Was that magic?" And I go, "It's actually your innate healing power could just be released, because often traumas we have, or the way society is treating us and demeaning us and marginalizing us, or just the way life goes, you can get stuck and not in an integrated flow. So it may feel like magic, but there was a lot of science underneath this that helps pull the curtain away from it looks like magic, and it's really integration.
Wow, I love how you literally came up with the definition of the mind while looking at the ocean and looking at nature. And I'm just blown away by your story and your answer and how this came to be. I'd love to understand and dive deeper into the 9 integrations or 9 domains that you just mentioned.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I mean, first of all, let me just check in with you and Steve. Let me just say the journey in these last 33 years has involved people who are, let's say, in the brain sciences saying, that's ridiculous. We've been
Mm,
proven mind is just the brain. Or people who are not interested in the brain at all say, well, why do we need to know anything about the brain? I say, look, you don't need to know anything about anything, but if you want to go deeper into the full picture of the mind, you want to be familiar with the embodied aspect, and you also want to know about relationships, our connection with each other in humanity and also with all of nature. Daniel, I just want to check it out with you, because it has been somewhat of a lonely journey, I got to say. So I appreciate that you two are open to it, because it hasn't always been something people say, oh, that's cool. It's more like, who cares? So, so I appreciate what you're saying, Daniel.
In fact, I think what you're describing is Newton's, law of gravity or Einstein's law of relativity. People worked around it, but until we actually found the foundational concept of what is actually driving behavior of molecules, we weren't able to go much beyond the simple observations.
And then you can also move to the other side where you can look at not only neuroscience, but you can go into quantum physics. And I know some of my neuroscience colleagues say to me, don't go to quantum physics. I said, yeah, but if you're going to really talk about energy, then you can't just stay with neuroscience. You have to ask the question, what is energy? And there's a whole bunch of cool stuff we can talk about that. So that trying to stay true to the foundations of that journey and seeing the wave and saying, okay, well, if it's energy, how do we stay true to energy? Then you got to be both relational and embodied. And also you got to go beyond just neuroscience and ask really some exciting questions like what truly is energy and what does it mean to integrate? These domains of integration are all about energy flow. But the mind is something broader than the brain and bigger even than the body. You can feel it right now in the relational field that we're creating here in this conversation.
Mm. And I know that integration is really a core concept, at least, to good mental health. What does integration mean, and what are some examples of integration that we can seek?
Well, and Daniel, your question directly relates to that about the domains of integration. So the first step was to say, okay, what's the mind? So we've defined it in part as this embodied and relational process. So the first thing to say about that is the location of this process of integration, like the location of the mind itself, is going to be not limited by skull or skin. The other thing to say is that because it's an emergent process, then it's about the interaction of stuff. So as we get into the 9 domains, just be aware that we're really going to be talking about energy flow, not just the movement of molecules. So it requires kind of an openness in your own way of perceiving things to feel into the verb-like unfolding of what are called emergent processes. So I can name the 9 domains and you'll feel into it, the verb-like nature of it. So if you're a noun-like linear thinker kind of person, you might hear this and go, why did Daniel and Steve ask Dan to come here? Because it's so wishy-washy or so gooey or so not scientific or stuff like that. So here's how it goes. There are 9 domains. I'll just list them and then we can explore any of them you want to explore. But they're not in any particular order. But in therapy, I try to start with this first one for sure, which is the integration of consciousness. And we can get into that in a lot of depth if you want to. But it's basically where you differentiate the knowing of being aware, that aspect of consciousness, from that which is known, like what you hear or see or smell or taste or touch, or what your body feels like, or your thoughts or your memories or your emotions. So those would be examples of the knowns, and you differentiate them so we can talk about that. And then you link them, and people who do this have a profound shift in their mind's ability to release optimal self-organization, which is basically integration. So that's why I always start with that. And if there are any of my patients listening, they'll know that's what we do. Or one of my patients is about to publish a book about her therapy with me, and she'll talk about the role of integrating consciousness in her journey from severe trauma to healing and integrating. That's Sally Maslansky's book that's called A Brilliant Adaptation. This journey, then, you can see really shifts things when you start with consciousness, because that seems to be a portal for intentional change to happen. So that's why I start with that. The next 7, before we get to the 9th, they seem to come up in any order and with different people in therapy. It's not really clear, but the last one we get to tends to come up on its own last. So first we'll start with a vertical integration, which is basically now going inside the body. And consciousness, by the way, is partly inside and partly outside. It's kind of a fascinating issue of consciousness that we can get into. But for vertical integration, it's really inside the body now. It's the way the sensations of the torso, the body proper, and the lower parts of the brain come upward to the higher parts of the brain, the reflective cortex. Consciousness is kind of mediated everywhere in the brain, but this is just a way to imagine it anatomically up and down. So there are some clients that come into therapy not aware of their body. And yet the body is this incredible source of wisdom and intuition and insight
And when you say clients aren't aware of their body, what does that mean?
Yeah. So if I say to a client, I've got two now where this is kind of the issue, but so how are you feeling right now, Daniel?
I'm feeling great.
Okay, you're feeling great. So now if I said to you, what do you notice in your body? What do you notice in your, let's just start the broadest thing. What do you notice in your body? So using the word feeling for body sensation.
I feel relaxed. I
Hmm.
feel calm.
And where do you notice the relaxed and calm sensation, literally in your anatomic body?
I would say my back and my arms.
Okay. And there's a relaxed feeling in the muscles. Okay. So that would be an example of muscle sensations. And if I asked you, this is about sifting the mind. So SIFT is an acronym for S for sensations of the body. And we're going to start there. So if we go to, let's say, your chest, do you notice any sensations in your chest as you're feeling this relaxed feeling?
It feels warm.
And warm in your chest. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then if we go down below your diaphragm, so below your chest into your abdomen, what do you feel there?
Also warm.
Warm. Okay, great. So this would be an example where you are really able to do vertical integration, where you're
Mm.
differentiating the different stuff there and you're articulating it to me. So it's going, the way it works is those energy flow patterns inside the body, which is muscles, bones, and organs. It goes upward through what's called lamina 1 of the spinal cord and up through the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, and it comes up into a part of the brain, primarily in your right hemisphere. But then I was asking you with words to tell me it. So you had to
Mm.
translate all that right hemisphere stuff over to the left. So the beginning of this is vertical integration, just being aware of body sensations and being able to hold them in awareness and then articulate them. So that's vertical integration. We just did it. And now you can see a little flavor of bilateral integration, the third form of integration, where left and right are really different from each other. And this became politically incorrect to talk about. So I had to be very familiar with the neuroscience and take on the neuroscientists who are saying, stop talking about the left and right hemispheres different. They're identical. And I go, that's one side of your brain is saying that. But let me tell you, the other side doesn't have words to fight back and say, no, it's not true. So there's a huge amount of science behind what I'm about to say. But the left and right are very different. And the interior signals of the body deposit themselves in us and humans almost exclusively in the right side of the brain. Now, I'm not talking about the skin. So if you touch your skin on your right hand, that goes to your left side of your brain. If you touch your skin on your left hand, it goes to your right side. There's a crossover. That's outer sensations. That's something touching the outside of your body. Interior sensations called interoception, and it's a right hemisphere job. So part of vertical integration, yes, is to become aware of the right hemisphere. So these overlap and you can see, but the right hemisphere has a broad focus of attention. And amazingly, it is not only receiving body signals that has this broad focus, but it's going to be the repository for autobiographical memory. And because it's using nonverbal signals, it generally, there's some differences in left and right-handed people, but in general, the right hemisphere doesn't have linguistic language. It has nonverbal signals, eye contact, facial expression, tone of voice, posture, gestures, timing, intensity of response. 7 signals you should memorize for your right hemisphere to make sure it's communicating. The left, in contrast, develops later. It is using linguistic symbols. It can speak its mind, right? It's more narrow in its focus. And it has this penchant for making lists like the list I'm making right now with my left hemisphere. So happy to be sharing it with you. And it has this kind of logic called syllogistic reasoning, which is basically a term for looking for cause-effect relationships. So it really wants to answer the question, why? So when a kid's around 2 and they say, why this, why that, you know their left hemispheres come on board. So both are important for creativity. Both are important for living a full life. Both are important for being artistic. Both are important for being emotionally present. So the misinterpretation that the right is creative, the left is just logical, that's wrong. And it helps just understand that they have very different experiences in pure awareness, like pure right hemisphere awareness compared to pure left hemisphere awareness. So bilateral integration brings them all together. And then just to name the others are, there's memory integration, which refers to 2 levels of memory. One is called implicit and the other explicit. but that's really important to understand trauma and its impact on us. The fifth domain of integration is called narrative integration. It's how you make sense through stories, that stories you tell yourself and can share with others. So narrative integration is when you say, oh, I've really just made sense of my life. Number 6 is called state integration, which is the idea that the way our nervous system functions and even the way life functions is things kind of cohere together in a given state in a given moment. Sometimes they're just temporary, like an unusual thing happened and you're in a certain state of mind for that thing. Other times they persist across giving us an identity. And so if we use identity for self, I call them self states. So this would be what some people might call parts or ego states. These verb-like persistent ways of having a state are part of what state integration is about. So that's domain number 6. When we do 7, 8, and 9, these are kind of related to each other. But one is basically relational integration, where it's how do you maintain a differentiated inner experience of who you are while also connecting with another person's inner experience and not losing that. So interpersonal integration or relational integration, so important in couples work. I do a lot of couples therapy because sometimes people are too disconnected, they're not linked enough, or they're losing differentiation, they're too fused. In either case, they get into chaos and rigidity. And one of the key things, the way I do couples therapy through this integration approach, is to feel into when the couple's having chaos or rigidity, see how that might relate to all these domains of integration, but particularly for this, make sure you're honoring differences and promoting linkages. So that's number 7. Number 8 is called temporal integration, and that's basically about time. And this is really the existential issues that we're aware of our death, and how do we answer the question like, why are we even here? What are we supposed to be doing? How do we show up? And for some people, it's turning to religion and religion saying what you're there for. Or some people, it's like, I'm here to make money or something. But if you go into your own personal quest for that, that's what temporal integration is how do you find meaning and purpose in life? How do you realize that we don't live in these bodies forever? And what do we do with that longing for permanence and immortality, but impermanence and mortality are the reality? And how do we realize nothing is certain, but we like for certainty? And then finally, there's the last one, the 9th domain is the one that kind of seems to sort of show up on its own. You don't have to work on them specifically. Like these other 8 domains, I very specifically focus on them with my clients. I wrote a whole book on this one too called Intraconnected. It's an identity integration, basically. Who are you? In the United States, we have the most individualistic culture in the world, and you can see where it's getting us. And the studies show that individualism can lead to an incredible amount of mental suffering. And so identity integration says, hey, is who you are just your body? Is the self really identical to the individual? Or is self really more a center of experience that you have an identity lens that you can shift? So you say, yeah, I have a bodily self, so I have an inner self. But I also have an equally important relational self that's connected to other people in my life that I know, or to my whole human family, or if you even go broader, to all of nature. And that would be basically where you're not just a me, you're also a we, and we integrate them with the funny word mwe, M-W-E. So mwe thanks you for letting me review these 9 domains of integration.
Wow, Dan, you are living in a different world than a lot of us. This is it's just so new, and I can't even believe the work that you're doing and how you came up with these things.
Yeah, truly just felt like a kid, learning about science for the first time and just being blown away by the depth, wisdom and knowledge that people have found over time. So yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing all that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
So, after someone understands these 9 different domains, what's usually the next step that they take in being able to utilize this information to help them grow and heal?
So there are exercises, and in the Mindsight book, I have these, and I even wrote a book with Dina Margolin called Now Maps, which teaches kids who are just before their teenage years, between like 8 and 12, how to actually develop these domains of integration. And in Brainstorm, you'll see a book for adolescents to do it. So in all these ways, you can actually do practices that cultivate each of the 9 domains. And we have this thing on our website, drdansiegel.com, which is called the Wheel of Awareness. And we've had millions of people. We don't charge anyone for it, which makes our accountant think we're out of our minds, but now that we have a definition of mind, we can say maybe that's true. But we just thought people should have access to it. So they do the wheel of awareness, and that's a way specifically of integrating consciousness. So in terms of your question, I mean, there are very specific things you can do, and the wheel is a metaphor for the hub being the knowing of consciousness, the rim being a metaphor for the knowns. And then you have this metaphoric spoke, a single spoke of attention. And there's a great power of attention. It's our superpower. And I made up this phrase just to remember that where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. So for the integration of consciousness, the first domain, the wheel of awareness gives you a very specific thing. I do it every day. It just changes things. And people who do it will tell you that. Because what it does is it allows you to distinguish this pure awareness from that which you're aware of. And you may say, well, what's the purpose of that? Well, here's on a very practical level, it means that if you get angry about something with your partner, then instead of yelling and screaming at your partner, you go into the hub of the wheel, and there's a spaciousness there that is accessible to you at any time if you choose to access it. And then I say this analogy in the book Aware as we start the book. It's like if that interaction that's full of tension is like a tablespoon of salt, and you haven't done a practice like the wheel, and your consciousness is like the size of an espresso cup, teeny little cup, and you dump a tablespoon of salt in there, of course, you can't drink it because it's too salty. But what if you've been doing a practice which expands that espresso cup size container of consciousness to 100 gallons? And now the same interaction with your partner comes in. You dump that tablespoon of salt into the interaction. It's diluted in 100-gallon size. Well, now you can drink the water because it dilutes it out. So on a practical level, doing the wheel gives you a 100-gallon size container of awareness. And on a deep level, I've done this now with 65,000 people. In the survey that I've done of people who are willing to share what the experience was like, we've been able to look at their experiences in the pure hub moment of the practice, where they say time disappears. One person who was at a parliament I was working with said, I've never felt, when he was in the hub, so much love before in my life. And he goes on to say that he had never felt so connected to everyone and everything. And now he's crying. And he didn't want to share that with his parliamentarian colleagues. So I asked why not. And he said, well, if I say the word love, they'll think I'm weak. So there was a silence between the two of us. And I said, so you don't want to appear weak? He goes, no. I said, but let me ask you, when you're making federal law, when you're setting up national policies, are you leaving love out of the reasoning? And we're just staring at each other. His eyes get really big. He starts wagging his finger at me, and he runs over to his colleagues, and I don't know what they said. But you can only hope someone realized that love is the strongest thing. And that when we're lost on the rim, we can get lost in all the details and not get in touch with what seems to be, this is after the 65,000 person survey, love is one of the most common words people offer when they drop into pure awareness. And they talk about being connected to everyone and everything, being home, being filled with joy. For some, it's God. For some, it's this sense of incredible equanimity. It's timelessness. You want to get into pure awareness and access what is really a source of hope in these challenging times, a source of love in these challenging times, a source of connection in a time of disconnection that really frees us up and empowers us. So this is why when I say I do it every day I get a chance to bend the spoke around, which is part of the practice, enter pure awareness. And I know people who've done studies on or experienced themselves psychedelics say, oh my God, and people have done that. We did a practice where we did the survey, and you can get mystical experiences just like you're on psychedelics, only this has no side effects except positive ones. And now what you get in this daily practice you do is also what's called 3-pillar practice. You're training the mind to be focused, attention to be focused. You're training the mind to have open awareness, so awareness is open. You're training the mind to have kind intention. So intention is kind. So focused attention, open awareness, kind intention. The research shows in other practices, if you do those 3, you get 5 physiological improvements in your bodily health and 1 change in the brain. The brain becomes more integrated, which is a predictor of resilience of the mind. But those 5 changes, as I say them, is you reduce the stress hormone cortisol, you improve cardiovascular functioning, you enhance the immune system's functioning, you reduce inflammation in the body by altering epigenetic regulators, and you optimize an enzyme called telomerase, which maintains and repairs the ends of the chromosome. So overall, especially the last one, you slow the aging process. So whether it's Caroline Welch, my partner, who wrote this great book called The Gift of Presence, or me, when you study our chronological age versus our biological age, the people go, whoa, why are you so young? We meditate every day. We do 3-pillar practice every day. And what other studies and other practices do, the wheel just happens to have all three in one practice. So those are kind of the medical reasons to do it, and the psychological ones in terms of the brain, get your brain integrated. But from a conversation we're having here, the issue is you have this opportunity to tap into a place of love and kindness and compassion, a place of connection, and a place of hope, because that's where all the other possibilities are that on the surface, on the rim, you may not have been able to access.
That is such a simple step and solution you can take to embody the many concepts of integration that you just mentioned. And that's something that everyone can do. It's just so simple, so powerful.
And why not do it? I mean, the reason I think just listing those physiological things of health, for no other reason, if you want to be bodily healthy or medically healthier, just do this every day. It takes about 24 minutes. It doesn't cost anything except your intention and your discipline to make it a part of your life.
And what practices, I know you mentioned meditation being one of them, like really help you get there and practice those?
A general practice, just all-purpose practice of your life, is remember the acronym SIFT, which is sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. So just be sure to do it in that sequence, because through school, we're so often rewarded for our thinking, and especially our left hemisphere thinking. And so you want to make sure to check in with your body, check in with your inspirations and images that you have that are not really in word form, go to your emotional life, and then go to your thought. So a general practice that will make your whole day more integrated is sift through things as you go through the day. Don't just go to what you think and the conclusions you have and all that stuff. And there's a lot of interesting neuroscience behind why the SIFT approach is profoundly integrative. But you can kind of see, knowing now the 9 domains, why even doing that puts in awareness, all this stuff, and then it puts the body in there, and you're making sure the left brain doesn't overly dominate your life, which it can because of the way school forces that in us. So the SIFT thing is a general practice. Doing some kind of practice, it doesn't have to be the wheel, but do a 3-pillar set of practices. Train your attention to be focused, train your awareness to be open, train your intention to be kind. You get all 3 in the wheel. So for me, I just do that because it's got all 3 of what research shows works. And plus you get to bend that spoke around and just drop into pure awareness in the hub, which is really fun, actually. So it's like every morning you're getting this hit of altered state of infusion of love, basically. So it's a cool place to live from. You don't have to hide away and just go to a cave and be in the hub. But it's kind of, I call it kind of living from the plane of possibility, not in it. So you're constantly tapping into that resource that changes everything once you do that. Because just to give you an analogy, if you literally go to Utah, the state of Utah, and go to the Pandopopulous forest, you will find a forest with 48,000 seemingly separate quaking aspen, Pandopopulous, quaking aspen trees. But when you find out what's going on there, 6 inches beneath the surface, it's one root ball. And when you test the DNA, as the scientists have done, it's one tree. So what on the surface looks like it's separate, like the water molecules coming between the waves, when you go beneath the surface, you realize it's coming from one essence. So when you do the wheel of awareness, you actually tap into the root, in a sense, the root ball. And so when I see you, Daniel, if I see you, Steve, the feeling I have in this body called Dan is that we are coming from the same essence. We're just different trunks of the same tree. And the feeling of joy and love and connection just it's exhilarating. And you can literally live your life like that. And, it's in indigenous teachings that this is the way to live. It's in contemplative teachings. I think the science of belonging is that that's how you really start to feel like you belong, when you look at your fellow human or fellow living being, and not even it's a thought in every cell of your body that I is just this body, but we is an equally important part of my identity
Hmm.
as the me that's this body. So if you do the wheel, that's just an example of one practice. Sifting and wheel, that would get you going. And then we have this whole another thing we talk about another time of if you have a body, you have a temperament, and there's all these personality patterns. I've been spending 20 years trying to decode with 4 colleagues, and we think we've decoded the Enneagram of personality, and now it looks like it's more broadly just human personality emerging from human temperament. So it's a really exciting moment of diving into these personality patterns. So that's a whole nother thing that adds to it, because in some ways our temperament can keep us away from feeling the wholeness that is our birthright to feel. So we may have 9 different ways that are kind of the challenges of being fully present. And so that just adds a kind of an issue on identity that is really kind of exciting that's just come out.
We would love to dig into that.
Yeah, we'd love to dig deeper. Like, what is temperament and how does it differ from personality?
Here's a way to think about it. So at birth, when we talk about children having different temperaments, it's most likely in the areas of the brain that have grown in utero. So it's a good place to look for temperament. So what I think happens, and my colleagues and I have created a whole kind of model called PDP, or patterns of developmental pathways. We think that 2 aspects of temperament that haven't been named before, we think are particularly relevant for this transition from being in the womb and being whole to coming out and what we call working for a living, where if you don't breathe, you die. If you don't eat, you die. As a mammal, if you don't have someone taking care of you, you die. So this literally do or die setup means that it's going to activate your survival brain, the brainstem, its different circuits. And if one of those circuits is particularly more sensitive than another, or more intense in responding, just a teeny bit, then after a day and then after a week, it's going to fire off more. And the way the brain develops is the more firing, the more wiring. So now you're a week old, now you're a month old. And what was just a small little, even chance difference becomes a bigger difference by 6 months of age. Carol Dweck, the wonderful scientist at Stanford who does work in growth mindset, has a totally independent theory that comes up with the exact same 3. We call them agency, that's A, bonding, B, and certainty, C. So you can remember it with ABC. Agency is where I have this drive, this motivation to get my essential bodily needs met. The second one is bonding, where I, as a mammal, have deep needs for relational connections. And C, certainty, is the motivation for predictability and protection, basically, safety. So if agency is blocked in some way, the emotion of irritation, frustration, anger, or rage comes out. We'll just refer to that with anger. So there's one subcortical network that Jaak Panksepp beautifully studies that's all about looking at the emotion. We're going to look at the motivation beneath the emotion. But when agency is frustrated, the emotion we're going to talk about is anger. Some people tend to get angry when they're in challenging situations. Other people, in contrast, for the bonding network, this, I call it a vector because it sets a direction. When this bonding drive, this motivation to have relational connections is frustrated, is thwarted, the natural reaction is to have separation distress or sadness, or when it's extreme, despair. We'll just call that sadness. And the third one, certainty, if I have a drive for this predictability and safety, when that's frustrated, I have the experience of anxiety, of worry, or fear, or terror, but we'll just call that fear. So there's degrees of intensity of it. So basically what we found was that in the general population, people tend to have like a go-to reactive emotion of anger, sadness, and fear. Jaak Panksepp has kind of identified as 3 very distinct networks in the brainstem. And so what we proposed, building on Jaak's wonderful work, is that these 3 form vectors that separate people out in terms of your temperament. Then what we found was that we had about 50,000 stories, 50,000 narratives that have been told over the decades to one of our colleagues, David Daniels. Well, what we found in the narratives was that people seem to be very distinct from each other in these narratives. Some would tend to look outward in the world focus on other people or things happening that you could see with your eyes. Others were kind of inward, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's my knowledge? What are my facts? And other people are kind of shimmering between the two. And we notice that in the narratives. We think there are these three aspects of temperament related to the primary orientation of your attention, which I call the tendency of attention. And it completely matches what millions of people who follow the Enneagram of personality have been exploring, only it does it from a totally different way. And then when Carol Dweck came up with her integrated theory of motivation, emotion, and development, it was like an amazing aha moment we call consilience. Once Carol Dweck came up with the same fundamental three needs, then it looks like this may be an explanation of human development, not just the Enneagram. What this meant was you could actually describe each of these 9 in ways where you leave the womb and now you're confronted with having to work for a living, this do or die situation. So the difference between personality and temperament is that personality is the adaptive strategy you had to your own temperament. And that depending on your situation in life, if you have challenging situations with your caregivers or other adversity that might go on, it will move the level of development of that particular strategy to a low integration level. And then your personality becomes more like a prison. But if you've had secure attachment, then your personality will be more like a playground, but you'll have the same personality pattern. Mm-hmm. So the big statement that we're hypothesizing is that attachment does not form the basis of your personality. It does not shape your temperament. It shapes the adaptation to your temperament to be low integrated for non-secure attachment and high integrated for secure attachment. And then what's exciting is you can learn, like the serenity prayer, let me have the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, because you can move an adaptive strategy from low integration to high integration. So you become more like a playground. But I don't believe, the research will show this in the future, I don't believe you can change your temperament too much, because that's a brainstem aspect of hardwiring, essentially, that you came out with. Now, maybe in the future we'll see that isn't even true. You can change anything. But my experience clinically, my experience personally, is when I know my own, I call it a PDP, your pattern of developmental pathway. When I know my own pattern, even though I've done work on myself, try to move from the various non-security I've had in my own life to security and try to understand my temperament. Something challenging came up just a few days ago. My head was spinning with my particular adaptive strategy. And I said to myself, look what you're doing. You're going to the low level of your particular PDP. So be kind to yourself. Understand that you're searching for wholeness in a world that is really full of uncertainty. And you're shimmering back and forth. I'm a dyadic uncertainty. That's my pattern. So I question everything. And I'm thinking to myself, what is useful about the questioning so you can do something positive about it? So you don't just accept dogma. If you're a psychiatrist, for me, it's been useful in my career. But in my family life, what's useful about the question you're having about this choice some family member is making? Or my mom just died recently and I'm a co-trustee of her estate and all these things are happening and I'm busy questioning. And I go, is this questioning really useful? Or is this because you're just in this pattern and you're really sad your mom died? So I want to take this temperament I have and have fun with it. As my mom, Sue Siegel, beautifully said when she learned from Caroline from her book, Gift of Presence, and me about mindfulness, she said, I think I know what mindfulness is. And I said, what is it, Mom? She goes, mindfulness is when what used to annoy you now amuses you. So I may never lose my questioning pattern, this certainty dyadic. That may be always my baseline. I can be amused by it and actually use it, in this case, for my personal life, so I could do the job of being a co-trustee on an estate. How's that, Daniel, for you?
All of your answers just blow me away. They're just so in-depth and so much wisdom and knowledge behind it. So for the people